I was there. Were you there when they opened up 400? And they did the run on that. You know, they did a race. It was the opening instead of before they allowed cars on the new toll road downtown. They had a race. I was there then. So we were there at the same time in the same city with 6 billion other people.
What year?
I was there from 89 to 99.
I was there 88.
There 89 to 99, 88 to 99. I left there in 1999.
Are you in San Antonio now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I lived in Dallas for a long time, and you do miss the seasons if you're used to someplace with seasons. Okay.
You're not in San Antonio. You're north of San Antonio.
I am. I'm north of San Antonio. This is the only Google talking right now. But it's I was like, I looked at
Who admits it?
All right.
Yeah, I went on. I looked at her house from Street View, showed it to her mom. I don't know where she lived.
It's warm there.
I gotta admit, when I
Pretty
looked
warm
at my
in
house,
here,
I went,
I
oh,
think.
there's my car in the driveway. I'm going, you know,
The amazing thing is that it's far for me.
It's cooler today.
yeah.
And he lives
And for me, tonight it'll be much cooler back in Wisconsin. Yeah, actually right after this, I'll catch a cab and get to the airport. So I'll miss the final session.
Well, I've
Thank
heard
you.
that they're actually sort of, you know, informal flash mobs when they hear that the Google truck is coming through.
Oh, yeah.
Right, you know, they see the trucks coming through, everybody starts running behind
They
them.
were doing this.
Doing a little dance.
It's
Privacy.
a little weird that our society, like 15 years ago, no one would have thought of a Google truck. I didn't even know what that was. It wasn't even a word.
Well, then there was a lady who lay down the roads. It looked like there was a dead body there when they did the scan of the road and so on. It's like everybody's going, call the police. There's a dead body in the location. No, just kidding. But I must admit, it's useful sometimes. You know, we have this whole business networking, and I had to meet some guy, some vice president for the first time. I'm wandering through his area, and all of a sudden I hear this voice go, Roy. And I go, oh, hi. And he goes, I recognize you from your profile on the social network. And I went, okay, this is good. Since I was selling the social network. So.
It could be good. Or it could be,
Yeah.
oh, you're Roy.
You're Roy.
Steve always remember you because I think of Mr. Brain, the kid's cartoon. My kids used to watch.
That's right.
Pinky and the Brain.
Mr. Brain.
Yeah, Mr. Brain.
You're picking the brain show.
Oh,
Cartoons here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be Mr. Brain.
And you're Mr. Brain.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
It's better being Pinky.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. Yeah. And we're not even calling on people. Yeah. They're brave though. They're in the front. So we'll call on them.
Well, they're not in the
first.
very front. They're second row.
You don't have them stand up and introduce themselves.
You're safe. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Started out that Blue River panel helping out on their issues and just moved from there. And now she's got some speed out.
What's that? Okay.
If you want to be, yeah.
It said somebody from Intel. I think we've just switched people. Hey, listen, I'm the one whose picture isn't even on there. Not even a company name. So I'm the complete interloper.
Okay, well, I hope the moderator shows up. We're about ready to go. didn't talk that much. Other
We
than
need
here,
to get you. You need
because
to come. You need to come
you know,
with
I
me.
do work, like I'm sitting in my hotel room working.
No chance to get work done.
No, yeah.
She's responded to an email right here before this thing starts.
I'm actually sending a note to my UDI guy.
Do you got room there? I could move down a little bit.
What's that?
I could move down a little bit if you guys feel
We're
crowded
gonna
or.
put Mike right there.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
'cause I
Well,
assume-
that's in front of the.
Yeah, that's not good, but I got a little bit of room. I can
Fine.
move over because you're kind of at the crack there.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm fine.
We'll just avoid the crack there.
I don't know what Disco wants. Tell him to sit down, Dale.
Okay, let's get started at 5.
What's that? Yeah, we have a mob here.
Flash him.
Hey, hey, hey.
Down.
All right, told him we'll talk when we get back.
Tell him to sit down. Yeah. Sit down in front.
Now he tells us.
You gotta stand in front.
Now I have to do that session over again.
Well, I
Is
just-
this working? Okay. Or I could, do you have something I could roam with? Is there it's wired, okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming. The last block of the last day of what will likely not be the last mHealth Summit, but thanks for coming. This session and the next session is being produced, if you will, by MDISS, the Medical Device Innovation, Safety, and Security Consortium. And my name is Dale Nordenberg, and I am one of the founders and the executive director. We have one of the other institutional founders here, the VA. We have Lynette Sherrill here up front from the VA, and we've got Randy Letzum, who's being sort of quiet in the front row, both of whom are very active nationally in the VA healthcare system with regards to security. So we got started a couple years ago because healthcare systems were very concerned about the issue of security in medical devices. And specifically, hospitals were worried that if a device had vulnerabilities and if it was compromised, and if there was an adverse patient event, that the healthcare system would experience liability. And so their solution was to go to the FDA and suggest that the FDA regulate medical devices so that if that happened, the manufacturer would be liable and not the hospital. So I said, that's interesting, but that's not the way the FDA regulates. And so let's talk about the problem. So what emerged was some very interesting information. And when you look at a problem in the context of public health, and I come to the table from a public health perspective, in addition to being a pediatrician and a medical epidemiologist, I worked at the CDC and the National Center for Infectious Diseases, was the chief information officer there, and worked with the FDA, reviewing science and technology. But as an epidemiologist and a public health guy, when you look at a problem, you ask 3 questions. How broad is the exposure? Well, we would, in this case, ask how many patients a year are touched by a digitally enabled medical device. So according to the CDC, there are 1 billion patient encounters per year. So if a patient goes to a healthcare system, what's the likelihood that they'll be touched by a digitally enabled medical device, and how many times? Well, it's pretty hard to go to a healthcare system today and not be touched by a digitally enabled medical device that's on a network of one sort or another. And probably they're not just touched by one. And if you go to the intensive care unit, it's like those pinball machines, ding, 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 ding. You know, you're touched by a large number of incidents, exposures. There's probably, pick a number between 5 and 50 billion exposures to medical advice, and that's extraordinarily back of the envelope. And we're going to delete that from the recording, by the way, just to be safe. So there's a large number of exposures. And then the next question is, how bad? If it's an exposure that results in you sneezing once a year, then exposure is not of concern. If it's an exposure that could result to a bad adverse event, morbidity, significant morbidity or mortality, that becomes a bigger concern. So we can imagine that if your insulin pump or your infusion pump or your linear accelerator or something that's giving other forms of radiation malfunctions, that it can have very serious adverse events. So broad exposure, really significant exposure, potentially really bad adverse events. And then the third question, which is very interesting, is can you prevent it? So, from a Centers for Disease Control perspective and from an applied public health perspective, important public health problems have a pathway for mitigation. And so, in fact, when you take a look at this, we really thought that you could really engineer a lot of the risk out. Now, when we say engineer, we don't put all the burden on a manufacturer or on another kind of a technology company. When we talk about engineering, we include the engineering of the organization, of the healthcare system, and how they're organized around IT and how they're organized around clinical engineering. So really everything from the silicone on up and everything about the way that's implemented. So it turned out that it was a really interesting public health problem. And as people who know me and have heard this talk now probably 100 times, you never want to be an interesting problem in healthcare. Right? You don't want to be an interesting patient. And you don't want to be an interesting public health problem unless, of course, you're the doctor on the other side or you're someone trying to solve the problem. So this is an interesting problem. And so 2 years later, where we're at is we put together a public-private partnership. We put together a consortium that includes all stakeholders in the ecosystem. So that would mean, well, okay, we have hospitals and other types of providers. We have manufacturers. We have companies like Intel, and we have companies like Trend Micro, and we've got we work closely with the government agencies like the FDA and Homeland Security and HHS. So put together this consortium to actually achieve three things. One is to ask the question, well, first goal was to put together the collaboration. The second goal is to ask, how can we better define the problem? And the third goal is to actually find out ways to solve the problem and to decrease the risk. So what we want to talk about today is, talk to some of the members of our consortium from different sectors. We've got a couple manufacturers, we've got the VA, we've got Intel up here, and we want to just discuss from their perspectives what are the issues around security in medical devices, what benefits are, were identified when we started out, what benefits do we see accruing, what benefits do we kind of project into the future. And before we do that, the epidemiologist in me has to ask a couple questions of everybody in the audience. Okay? So how many people in the audience are from a manufacturer? Anyone? Couple. How many are from healthcare systems? By the way, I know there's a denominator, right? So if I ask questions and I don't get enough numerator, I'm going to just keep asking questions, guys, okay? So right now we got about 10% of the audience covered. We got 3 or 4 manufacturers. We had really very few healthcare systems. What about other kinds of technology companies? Okay. There we go. That's a bunch. Academics? Anyone in academia? Okay. Any other category? Pardon? Federal. Okay. Well, you're a healthcare system, right? Well, there you go. Any other categories that I missed? No? Federal? What was the other category? There were some people that weren't academia or manufacturers or technology companies. Nothing else? Pardon? Other. Great. Okay. Okay. And so also, please, at any point, if you have any questions or input, please just raise your hand. And what we would like to do, we're not going to go in order because we were started by healthcare systems. So it seems like we should have Lynette Sherrill introduce herself, because I always mess up her title, and then give some context for why the VA was really a co-founder of MDISS and some issues or aspects of why security emerged as an issue in medical devices, and a little bit what's going on and why this kind of a thing, these partnerships are important.
Okay, that was a lot. So my name, I'm Lynette Sherrill, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Health Information Security Division of Field Security Service for OINT. It's a lot to say that I work in the IT department, but my office's focus is on medical devices and the security surrounding medical devices throughout the entire enterprise of the VA's hospital systems. So we were particularly interested in starting and helping with this consortium based on some trending of some data that we were doing across our networks. We started to see a greater number of medical devices becoming infected on our networks, and when we started asking the questions, there wasn't a lot of answers as to what we were supposed to do about those from manufacturers or from biomedical engineers or from anyone really. You tell them you had an infected medical device and they'd be like, oh, we didn't know those got infected, so what do we do now? So that was about, yes, go ahead.
So this is, you asked me to remind you about this. So,
Oh.
so Lynette just pointed out that people even know that medical devices got infected, but what are people's reactions? So, oh, I have an infected device. Do they continue to use it? Do they take it off the network?
Well, and that actually poses the interesting question that comes out is, what do you do? Do you continue to provide patient care with the device? Obviously, and you can ask anybody, there's an educational issue within the industry about this problem. You ask the manufacturer and they're like, oh yeah, sure, the patients aren't affected, you can keep using that device. Well, you haven't even asked me what virus it's infected with yet. Well, it doesn't matter, it's good. So obviously then you try to talk to someone else at the manufacturer and say, okay, and clearly I'm generalizing, and it's not true of all manufacturers. So, so that I'm between two. so that's, yeah, so.
Let's take another poll.
Exactly, yes.
Would you tell people to take it off the network?
Instantly.
Okay, that's convenient speaking.
Yeah.
And Medtronic would say, take it off the network. Okay.
Right.
Other manufacturers.
Exactly. But, you know, you still have, there's a lot of stakeholders in this space. You think about the clinician. Typically, it's a clinician who notices something that's gone wrong with the device, but they don't necessarily know what to do. So we really needed to get answers, and we tried on our own as the VA, jointly with DOD, to go and talk about this with the manufacturers and say, you know, what are we really going to do about this problem? It's a significant issue, not only from the standpoint of patient safety, from the standpoint of the cost that the healthcare delivery organizations bear when a device does get infected. Significant cost in the cleanup efforts of an infected medical device, canceling patient appointments, moving them around, feeing out patients if it's a critical system. There's a lot of costs that are involved. So we went jointly with Kaiser and went and found this very smart man, Dr. Dale Nordenberg, who does this kind of painful process of establishing nonprofit organizations for a living, and because we wanted to find out, what do we do, how do we fix this, how do we go as an organization and start to change an industry as big as the healthcare industry, because we really recognize very early on it's an industry issue. And by that meaning everyone in the industry needs to be more aware that a significant problem exists with the threats to medical devices. Medical devices have quickly grown from being standalone systems not connected to our networks, where almost every medical device now that you encounter is connected to the network and passing digital data back and forth with other devices on your network without any protection built into the devices inherently or added on later. So there's it's kind of the scope of the issue at a high level. In VA, we have somewhere around 50,000 network-connected medical devices across our enterprise. And of that, just so you guys know, I mean, we do track and trend our medical device infections. As statistical percentage, over the past 2.5 years that we've been tracking just medical device infections, the ones that are known, we've had about 385 individual medical device infections.
And how did you identify the infection?
The way that we've identified medical device infections, most commonly has been network traffic analysis. If you have, a lot of times our security operations center will see anomalous traffic going out in and out of our gateways, and they'll say, oh, hey, track this device down and find out what it is because it's doing something very weird. And it turns out to be a medical device that's, you know, sending bad data back and forth out the gateways. That's typically the way we find out about an infected medical device.
Do you find a signature usually?
Sometimes we do, and sometimes we can identify the infection. Obviously, if it pops up against a device that has antivirus or something running, it will identify a particular virus. Right now, are you getting to like what's the most common virus we've seen? Not really.
So what percentage of viruses are identifiable, what percentage of malware are identifiable by a signature, for example? Do you know the answer to that question?
I know sort of a statistical industry sort of number, and does Mike know? It's around 20% of all the malware that exists in the world is identifiable by antivirus software based on a signature.
Right, so that's why when you say
Yeah.
you identified it by the network traffic,
Mm-hmm.
so if you found something where the network traffic was anomalous, but it didn't have an identifiable signature,
Correct.
do you say it's malware, or do you say it's a broken machine, or how do you categorize that?
We typically have to go, you obviously have to dig into it a little deeper. It depends on what it's doing. In one instance, we had a user ID and a password that wasn't common to our password scheme leaving the network, and it was actually going to an IP address space that was registered in a foreign country, which typically VA traffic wouldn't necessarily do that. So then you kind of go, okay, well, why would a user ID and password be leaving our network to go log into a device in a foreign space, or what appeared to be a foreign space? So those types of things we're very cautious when we see anomalous traffic or an infection on a device. We immediately pull it out of patient care service. And we have to because of the unknown. We don't know what that virus has done with that device, and we have to assume, we know it's compromised, so we have to assume safety of the patient care that's being provided with that device is compromised at that point as well.
So one of the things that's been alluded to and implicit in what Vanessa's been talking about is that, well, she stated, not long ago, devices were standalone. They've rapidly evolved to be networked, which really just requires you plug them into a wall. And that brought on a whole host of issues. And it also brought the IT staff into the equation, whereas it used to just be clinical engineering. And then the discussions that had to happen with industry and other partners, those relationships weren't actually in place. And so when they started to have to struggle with how do you rapidly ramp up and deal with these problems, the expertise wasn't within the system, nor was it really accessible by the relationships that would be required. This is exactly what happens in all the healthcare systems that we've spoken with. And that's why MDISS was really founded, was to help accelerate, if you will, at a population level. That's an epidemiologist, public health guy, to really get groups of people to come together to rapidly start to decrease the risk. Now, eventually people would figure out where everyone was and figure out the issues. But in the meantime, there's pretty massive patient exposure. Now, one caveat, right? So when I have slides and I present, I'll often put up a slide of the adverse events or adverse effects on the medication. But if one of the most popular, commonly prescribed medications, it's used for everything from simple ear infections to other sundry things. It's already been around for decades and decades and decades. If you read the side effects, no one in the world will take it, right? And yet we prescribe it, a gazillion times a day. So one of the important things that MDISS communicates is we are obviously believe strongly and are thankful for the important innovation that comes out of the manufacturing community. And we obviously appreciate the important contribution of service delivery for healthcare systems. What we say is we believe there's a level of risk that we can actually help reduce by coming and working together. And that's what we're a public health project, and we'll hear more about how we're sort of, attacking the problem from a public health perspective. Before we move on, anyone want to ask any questions on that before we move down the line? Steve, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure.
And give a manufacturer perspective of, over the last, let's say, 2 years, what have you seen from a security perspective, and what have you seen evolve as we've grown as a consortium and some challenges in that?
All right, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Abrahamson. I am here from GE Healthcare, and I work at GE Healthcare's former headquarters location in Waukesha, Wisconsin. As some of you may know, about 5-6 years ago, GE Healthcare moved its headquarters to the UK, but I still work in Waukesha. I didn't move to the UK with the headquarters contingent. My title at GE Healthcare is I'm the program manager for product security. I work within the Science and Technology Organization, which is basically a central engineering organization. And my role is to work across all the different engineering organizations within GE Healthcare. And it's fair to say that I think GE Healthcare is a large medical device manufacturer. We have about 40 different engineering organizations across the globe making products. You may be familiar with some of our products. It's everything from MRs, CTs, the big stuff, down to ultrasound machines, down to monitoring devices that might be used in a hospital. We also make a lot of healthcare IT devices, so we have a very sizable business in healthcare IT. And then also we make life sciences products and diagnostic agents. But we make a lot of medical devices and healthcare IT products. We are working very diligently to improve the level of product security across all of our products, and that's what my role is to make that much more consistent across the company. And a couple things to think about when we talk about product security at a medical device manufacturer like GE. But I don't want to focus on GE. I think what I'm going to talk about is typical of what you would see at, for sure, a larger medical device manufacturer, and then depending on the size, a lot of this would be common with other manufacturers as well. We see a couple of key drivers that lead us to be interested in elevating our focus on product security. Those three basic drivers are market-driven interest. We see a lot of interest by our customers. Another driver is business risk, which I'll describe. And then the third driver, which is more in the gray area right now, is regulations. So when we talk about market-driven interest, as you might imagine, it's becoming more and more prevalent among our customers to take a much greater interest in security. And the larger and more sophisticated the customer, the greater the interest in security is. The VA certainly would be large as well as sophisticated, and they have a great interest in security. DOD as well, in a much more rigorous way in terms of the actual security controls on devices. But large customers tend to be very interested in security. As a matter of fact, a couple hours ago, I was on a telephone call with one of our large customers talking about an agreement that we want to put in place that addresses security of our products and services to them. So one major driver is market interest. The second one that I mentioned is business risk. It's business risk in the sense of reputational risk, where we don't want to send out in the marketplace products that don't have a high level of security. We don't want to be sending out products that become infected with viruses and that sort of thing. And then we don't want to be in a position where somebody might construe us to be liable for something that happens in the user environment that's associated with some kind of a product security issue. Now, that's certainly one for the lawyers to sort out, but we don't want to get to that point. We want to enable our customers to implement effective security measures, and the extent to which we can do that by designing secure products and delivering secure services, the better off we're going to be within the market. And then the third one I mentioned is regulations. Right now, there are not any security regulations that directly touch the device manufacturers. There are some that are sort of lightly touching us, but the key thing is that we need to enable our customers to meet the regulations that are applicable to them. For example, HIPAA is one everyone's familiar with in the U.S. So even though we're not regulated, and there's always discussion on maybe the FDA moving into addressing security more directly, we're not directly affected by regulations right now. And that actually is a double-edged sword. We're certainly not usually calling for additional regulations, but for somebody like me trying to implement measures across a big company like GE Healthcare, when there's no actual applicable regulations, we are a highly regulated industry, but our regulators are not focused on security, they're focused on patient safety. There's some overlap between patient safety and security, but it's a little bit different focus. So we don't have the direct effect of regulations right now. Now, I talked about customers. The next thing I want to quickly mention in this segment is we have different customers, and they may have different motivations for why they are interested in security. And indeed, if we look at the key stakeholders, the stakeholders may have different motivations, and that can lead us to potentially come up with some different solutions in terms of security, but hopefully a lot of common ground as well. We have customers, for example, the DOD and governments. Their primary motivation is pure cybersecurity. They don't want outside parties taking control of devices for both security reasons as well as patient safety reasons. We have many customers, and I would say the typical healthcare provider in the U.S. is primarily motivated by privacy laws. They're looking at security as a means of protecting themselves against falling afoul of HIPAA regulations or other applicable privacy laws. And then the third major stakeholder is, of course, the device manufacturer, and we are very focused and traditionally focused very much on patient safety. So most of the systems and processes that we have in place are very focused on patient safety, and we have to mimic a lot of the things that we do for patient safety to address security concerns. And I would say that we're very good at addressing a security concern that might lead to a patient safety issue, but if it's a security issue that may not be a direct driver of patient safety, for example, a pure privacy issue, our systems are not as well positioned for that currently. Now, we talked about responding to customer incidents and whatnot. For those of you that are in a healthcare provider environment or a device manufacturer, you're probably very familiar with the requirement to have some kind of a complaint system. So large companies will have very sophisticated and comprehensive complaint management systems. We have an organization called the CHUs, which stands for the Complaint Handling Unit. So if somebody says, well, who's your CHU? That is the person that handles the complaints coming in from the field for that particular product line. We can look through our complaint records, and we have, we tend to put anything in the complaint system. If it's a service call, if it's a pure complaint where somebody says, I'm unhappy with your device for this reason, obviously that's a complaint. But if it's just an unscheduled service call, that goes in the system as well. We can screen all of our complaints, and it's actually very hard to filter out things that are related to security issues or viruses. And I suspect a lot of that is because it's not, again, dealing with a lot of customers that are not as well in tune with security activities. It may not be identified as a security issue. It may be some type of a functional issue. The field engineer will go and reload the software. It works fine, and they may not ever recognize it as a security issue. So those are some of the things that we're looking at as well. So we have different customers, different motivations, but what we're really looking for, as I talked about working with our customers very closely, we're trying to find collaborative solutions that work for everybody. We can't just focus on the device. We can't just focus on the user environment. We have to have solutions that work across both, as Dale would say, the whole ecosystem, that work within the healthcare provider environment, and we need to work with our customers to find ways that we can better enable the security measures that have to be put in place in the user environment. So that's kind of the opening discussion. Yeah.
You made a distinction between security and safety and security and privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Not very similar, exactly the same root cause. How can you differentiate between a security problem that is a pure privacy issue and a security problem that's a safety issue?
Yeah, for example, if you're looking at a data breach or a loss of PHI, that is very likely, now there may be some exceptions to this that somebody could identify, but that's typically not going to be a patient safety issue directly. They may lose their data. That's certainly not a good thing, but it's not going to directly impact safety. And in fact, when I mentioned that we have a lot of processes put in place to direct safety issues. If we were to receive a complaint that is related to a loss of data that doesn't have any patient safety impact, the CHU team that I mentioned, they're probably not going to process that because from a patient safety perspective, there's very low risk. Now, if there's some type of a security issue that leads to corruption of data or something that's going to impact the functionality of the device, certainly that is a patient safety issue, and that's going to be dealt with as such. So, and one of the things I know I very briefly mentioned, what we're trying to do is mimic all the processes that we follow for patient safety issues, mimic those processes for security, whether it has patient safety impact or not. We want to make sure we're doing the same type of risk assessments, the same type of mitigations and controls in order to get the risk down to a minimal level.
So you're a big company, lots of customers, you have access to the market, or good access to a broad market. Any insights about what a partnership like this brings to the table, which is slightly different access?
Yeah, I think a partnership like this is very important because, and I'll confess, I'm an engineer. I don't, hopefully I'm not I'm not as smart as most engineers. I guess that's maybe a crude way to say it. But I work a lot with software engineers, and I also work a lot with our commercial people at GE, as well as directly with customers. When you're working in the engineering community, engineers can look at data, and they can determine what is the right answer for a given problem based on pure logic and data and lots of analysis. And when you talk to a customer, customers will see risks a little bit differently than our engineering teams do. So what we sometimes find ourselves doing is falling into the trap of arguing with our customers over what types of things they should really be concerned with and trying to convince them that what they see as a risk really isn't a risk. And I think we have to be a little bit more empathetic with our customers and work more collaboratively and get out of the mode of, this is the device manufacturer's perspective versus this is the healthcare provider's perspective or anybody else's, and come up with solutions where we understand the limitations within each environment and have solutions that work for everybody and recognize everybody's different perspectives.
Thanks. So, the notion of different perspectives is important. One of the things that came up as we marched along here is the healthcare organizations started to articulate their requirements around security, which really wasn't happening, even a couple of years ago. What we heard from industry was, well, who's going to pay for it? Because it's quite competitive. So if a hospital puts out an RFP and multiple manufacturers respond, their concern is that they're going to get price gouged if they start to put security features on them. What we've been able to do in our consortium is to really communicate to the industry, hey, the hospitals are ready to pay. And not only, they want these features, they recognize there's going to be a cost to it. And in fact, we may get to this in a little bit, but some of them are starting to actually do cost adjustment. If the manufacturer comes in and doesn't have certain security features, some hospitals are starting to figure out ways of adjusting it so that there's not an unfair competitive advantage, pricing advantage, by actually coming to the table with a stripped down device from a safety perspective, let's say. So let's move on. Let's go to Mike Taborn from Intel, and then we'll go to Roy from Covidien. So, Mike, you're sort of the Intel, the real Intel inside.
Okay.
You guys should think about this.
Right. Okay, well, I'm Mike Taborn, platform architect, and focusing on medical. And so, in this consortium, I think that we recognize, as you know, I focus directly on devices, and so I work with OEMs such as GE, Siemens, et cetera, and to understand what their needs are and problems and challenges are, as well as our health IT team, as you may know, works with the hospitals, and so the HDOs understanding what their needs are and relative to that infrastructure. So this particular consortium actually fits nicely in our, in what Intel's trying to do is understand kind of the whole flow. Okay, everything from the device level all the way to the back end of the hospital. Understand what it takes, from various aspects, i.e., obviously security, which translates often to performance, and with our in this case with McAfee now, we're learning more and more about what it takes to put security in, not only from a software perspective, but from a hardware perspective. So what we hope to achieve, and we have been achieving and learning in this consortium, is some of the trade-offs that are made really in the hospital environment. I think the HDOs have a challenge. I mean, hospitals are unique. I think I was in a conversation earlier today, and when you kind of start analyzing, because one might argue that you have an industrial automation problem. Okay, I mean, if you're doing a factory and not people, but just strictly a factory, you'd say you've got these devices and you've got all of them have embedded operating systems typically, and they typically have controls, and of course security, can be pieces of that or not. Okay, and so you say, well, I can analyze that, but then once you actually start looking in a hospital, it's actually much more complex than that. Okay, much more complex than a factory, because there's so many things you can't control. There's so many events that happen that are completely out of the ordinary. Okay, it's having interrupts all the time. I mean, in a manufacturing environment, and this is often what people do. They often compare it, but they can't really, because you also have the challenge. People sometimes take hospital or this particular area and try to compare it to the financial community. Right. Well, as I often tell some of my colleagues, that the financial community will take a 3 to 5% loss on data. right? They'll take that much as far as, losing money, right? Okay, and it turns out that in hospitals and certainly the healthcare system, we take essentially zero defects, right? That's the approach. And I think, and we mitigate. Okay, so there's always that. So I mean, so there's a very unique challenge that in this particular community that we have relative to these needs, and certainly security being area, and obviously from Intel's perspective, we again understanding the needs of the groups and understand the whole value chain or the whole and actually being able to actually offer since we talk to a lot of the OEMs. Of course, my contribution, or certainly Intel's at the device levels, I can actually represent many of the OEMs that may not be sitting at the table because I have conversations with them all the time. And it's ironic, I guess, Dale mentioned one issue we get all the time with security is that whole notion of being valued out or priced out. In other words, when one particular manufacturer decides to implement some security feature, their big concern is that, well, geez, if I implement it and my competitor doesn't, right? I'm all of a sudden $100 more, right? Will the HDO actually pay for that? And so, and they're concerned, so consequently they say, well, no, we're not going to do it, right? So that's again where we have to get the HDOs to do the pool and say, yeah, we're going to do it, and then I think you'll have manufacturers that will agree to go down that path as long as they feel like they get compensated.
So, so again, pointing that out, it's for manufacturers to get out there and kind of test the market and wonder, will people pay or not? They can go to their customers, but it's it's not an efficient process. In contrast to, for example, to the consortium, being able to access the VA and Kaiser and the DoD and partners and Hopkins and Duke and Sutter and a whole host of other healthcare systems that represent what we call a market level voice. So there's a public health imperative to move as quickly as we can in a deliberate way, if you could put together those, juxtapose those concepts. Move quickly but deliberately. And the consortium, a public-private partnership like this, as Lynette said, it's not the first I've participated in. It's really a nice forum for getting the voices from different stakeholders to the table as quickly as possible. One of the things that we heard, not surprisingly, I don't know if Steve or Roy will talk in a minute, but when a group like this forms, the first reaction is from people out in the community is, well, how is this going to perturb the environment? How is this going to change my reality? I'm a manufacturer. Am I going to all of a sudden have lots of requirements I'm going to have to deal with? Or is this group going to go out and start doing press releases like crazy about, that would, bring unfavorable attention to stakeholders? Listen, we can probably say things that would make healthcare systems unhappy. We can probably say things that would make manufacturers unhappy. But the point is to take what we again refer to as this public health approach and to just stay focused on the mission. It's to just work on the identification of the risks and the mitigation of those risks in a highly collaborative way. And so, as Mike Tabor was just talking about, is as we identify the requirements, as we identify the controls, and we start to put it in there, it's just critical that we deal with the issue of cost, and it's been really helpful from a business perspective to help us remember those things. Now, Roy will introduce himself in a moment, and Covidien is really one of the most recent additions to the consortium. It's been great to come on with a team, and it's great because it's important. Even a company has so much diversity when you get to the size of a Covidien or a GE or a Medtronic. So much diversity within the company that it's really helpful to have different members of that company, just like in healthcare systems. So after Roy introduces himself and why Covidien was interested, we're going to go back to Lynette and let her describe what the VA and the VHA are like and what challenges it would be for a manufacturer to figure out how to even work with the VA and how come a consortium like ours can help that.
Okay. So good afternoon. I'm Roy Wilsker. I'm Senior Director of Technology Planning for Covidien, and we're about an $11 billion device manufacturer. You might see our name on the Green Monster if you watch Red Sox games. That's why we brought somebody over from the advertising department in Gillette. He thinks of things like that. The only time I've ever minded that is when Bill Belichick had to confess to videotaping other teams and cheating, and he was standing in front of this banner which had 500 Covidians in back of him, and really didn't help us on that date, but now you know what the name is. But from my point of view, this is a changed world. If you look at a medical device manufacturer, this used to be a question of having an isolated box that was a bunch of sensors that was attached to somebody's body that went to a fluorescent screen, and we put some very, very smart algorithms in there to say what should be blipping up on that screen when that happened. But that world is disappearing on us. All the devices that we're putting together now are going to be connected. They're going to be connected to data sources in the sky where we collect anonymized information for data mining. They're going to be connected to, hospital EMR systems. They're going to be sending things to iPads and mobile devices that caregivers are going to be walking around with and so on. So it's a very new world for us, and it's not just from our point of view a matter of worrying about risks like viruses, but it's also worrying about how do we be a good citizen? How do we have the quality of service so that when we put our devices onto that hospital's network, we don't blitz their network and make it inoperable simply because of the volume of data that we're putting on it? How do we understand the variety of healthcare systems that are out there? And that was a conversation we were having at lunch, that how do you get a realistic picture of what you have at different hospitals? I remember a few years ago I went to a meeting on hospital architecture. Intel actually sponsored it. And we had somebody talking about how they design hospital buildings, and she was saying, we design them for 50-year spans. I don't know about you, but I'm in technology. I don't even want to think 3 years ahead. 50 years is way past what I can think of. And she was saying that the only thing I really think of is putting a lot of ceiling space in, because we're going to have to do a lot of things with networking. And I don't know what we'll go in there, but I just want to make sure there's room for it. Now, she didn't know that those boxes were going to go from being this big to being this big, but she had the right idea there. She knew that everything was going to be connected there and so on. For us, a consortium like this is of enormous value because it brings together all the stakeholders. If you see something that's coming from an Intel or somebody who has a vested interest in the chips, that's one thing. If you see something coming from the government, that's another thing. If you see something coming from GE or Covidien, those are manufacturers, and we have an axe to grind. When you see something that's done from a consortium where all these folks are getting together and saying, listen, primum non nocere, first do no harm. We have a moral and a business obligation to put out things that are safe and don't harm people. And that we have come together to agree on these things, I think there's an enormous amount of force on that. Alfred Sloan, you may have heard of the Sloan School at MIT. Alfred Sloan was for a long time the head of GM. And he was famous for saying that industries that don't regulate themselves get regulated. So again, it's in our interest to write that first contract of what do we want these things to look like, so that people like me can go back and work with all the varied part, as you said, within our company, and say, listen, this is where this is going. This is how we have to work internally. This is how we have to work with our partners in order to produce products that really are demonstrably safe and produce good results with this for other people. And the last thing I'll say on that is something I said to somebody else. There's a famous aphorism that if somebody likes your product, they'll go to 1 or 2 people, and they'll tell them that they like that product. If somebody's unhappy with your product, they'll go on average to 13 people and tell them they're unhappy with your product. So, we'd much rather be on that you really love our product and it does really good things for you than on the side of, that's a really awful product and look what it did. So.
Thanks, Roy. So, I mentioned this discussion, and Lynette's going to share with us what it's like to deal with the VA. And you talk about any of the healthcare systems, especially the larger ones. And it's important because, when we started this, my fantasy, to think that after as many decades as I've been in this business, my clearly a fantasy, but it was, well, we'll start this. It's really important. Then we're going to call 20 crazy, but we're very direct about that. And then that would take probably 4 weeks because it's going to be twice as hard as doing. So in 6 weeks I would have had it all done. And we're 2 years down the line, and needless to say, it's been an interesting process, and just like every other one I've done. But it's like taking finals, I guess. You just forget about it about a week after you've done the last one. So what does it take to work with the VA and on any given issue, but specifically for this? How's it structured and
That's a big question. So within the VA, and it's probably typical of most healthcare systems, or not, we have the clinical side of VA. VA's IT department is wholly centralized. And then the clinical side is under the VHA umbrella, Veterans Health Administration. And it takes a lot of collaboration to work an issue like this across the VA. There's several stakeholders on the clinical side. Obviously, your biomedical engineers. In the VA, they work in the clinical side. They work on the VHA side. It takes your IT department getting them involved, and then getting the clinicians involved. And then, last but not least, because that's the field people, and typically when you bring a problem to field people, they want the problem solved so that they can move on. It's when you bring it to the leadership usually in Washington, D.C., that's when it becomes a problem. And it's just becomes a bigger issue because there's a lot more at stake there. So we were actually discussing this earlier. A lot of times the way to solve a problem is to bring it to your leadership and to bring it to the people that actually have to implement in the field at the same time, so that there's some at least same messaging going on across, and you get a more successful adoption rate of implementation. Within the VA, this specific issue, as Dale said, we've been participating in the consortium for a couple of years, and even the idea of how do we go about doing this in the VA, this is not a trivial problem. Just fixing a virus or responding to a virus or figuring out the design of a network so it's more secure, that's not the silver bullet that fixes this whole problem across industries. We have to talk to manufacturers. We have to look at procurement. How are we buying things, and how can we use procurement to drive a little bit of change? How do we talk to the manufacturers? How do we get manufacturers engaged when we do have an issue that we need their response from? There's, and within an organization like VA, that's also not just me or my office that can do that. I have to reach out to several offices and organizations in order to get to that right person at GE to get that response that we're looking for on how do we do something so we do it right. Because at the end of the day, as Roy mentioned, we're all trying to drive the patient safety. We're all trying to make sure that that environment stays stable and safe to continue to service the patients.
So how many people have we had to touch and activate within the VA around this issue? How many people do you think we're dealing with right now to get the VA engaged around this consortium?
I
can come up with a number. What do you guys think? Think about the guys in California, think about the VHA side, the VA side.
There's a couple, probably a couple hundred people that if you talk about the different touches that we've tried just within VA. Is it? Yeah. Well,
I'm not in the VA, so
yeah.
I don't know how many you've touched. But we have about
Right.
a dozen, probably 12 to 15
People who are active counseling, people who we've gone out to and talked to and tried to educate about this issue and as we continue to talk with them, we've talked to hundreds of people, Randy and I would say.
Like a big thing is educating all of the biomedical or security officers or privacy officers. We spend how many countless hours teaching them about this because they, it sounds like a big number, but really we have a big organization, 300,000 plus employees. So and the contractors about double that. So we got to talk to a lot of people because it's a lot of education. And when that's office does a lot
and stress. But it's really about 12 or 15 people that are actively involved on the IT side, the security side, the informatics side of the organization, people that are influencing it nationally, people that are responsible for the hospitals, which are different from the people that are really doing policy, right? So we've had to get local people involved to actually get into the hospitals to pull their requirements, and pull their input, and also help them locally. So it's been an extraordinary exercise, and it's more complicated than most, but it's very simple.
Right.
So, what that means is we can actually work with industry, and now it's fairly straightforward for, a GE or a Covidian to step in and then have access to that kind of input, and vice versa. So, one of the things that, the hospitals, were frustrated because any given hospital, and the VA and Kaiser and the DoD together were told, they just weren't big enough. So one of the things that the consortium does is it delivers a market level voice. We don't know exactly what number you hit when you tip over into a market level voice, but there are enough there that when requirements are expressed, concerns are expressed, it starts to be something that all stakeholders listen to, including the people that are expressing it. So other healthcare systems start to get it as well. And every stakeholder can take that to the bank. In other words, they can go to their leadership and talk about what they're hearing, what people are doing. So that's also very valuable to do change management internally. So I just want to make sure we get audience involved. But any comments or questions so far? You came here last afternoon. Anybody seeing medical device security in your environment as an issue?
Well, there's this whole issue of what is a medical device. As you know, there's a lot of demand to connect, get the information here to there, which creates a whole new set
From a security perspective.
for the security.
Now, where do you, which stakeholder group do you sit with?
I work for a big company that manufactures devices as well as provides clinical nephrology clinics, 2,000 nephrology clinics in the so I'm kind of...
That's dialysis related. So it's a very big point, which seems to refer to the fact that right now, nationally, there are billions of dollars going in across the country to advance adoption of health information technology. And one of the key features is meaningful use, and one of the key features is interoperability. So now, as an epidemiologist that did infectious diseases, what I would say is we have a highly promiscuous environment, right? And it makes it much more vulnerable. And so it raises, we have new and if you will, evolving security issues as we drive harder on the notion of interoperability and HIT adoption. And then the notion of what is an IT, what is a medical device. So that gets into some things related to regulatory issues, right? But from a patient perspective, they don't care, right? So there's an app that may or may not qualify as a medical device, but it influences care, then the patient's going to care, right? Whether or not it's been identified yet by the FDA. So how many, I just was exposed to the number of new apps that are coming out in the healthcare arena per month. And that number, anyone want to guess? How many apps per month are coming out in healthcare? I've heard 400 to 500. Anyone have a different number? Pardon?
I had 3,000 a year.
3,000 a year, so 300 to 500 a month is 3,000 to 5,000. And how many did you say? 1,300 per month, but how many did you say per year?
Like 3,000.
So ballpark. Last year, so this year might be growing from 3,000 maybe up to 5,000. But each of those in some ways are some variation on a medical device, right? And it brings into the whole issue that Roy was talking to about the whole notion of bring your own device and what's emerging with that whole movement. Enormous exposure that's following. Any other comments or questions? So let's just define what that means, right? So what does it mean to monitor your healthcare traffic? And also, in the context of medical devices and security, just share with them what you did from an architecture perspective. What burden that, it's high level in that. You don't have to go to your architecture background.
I think that a recent PwC survey said that the average CIO at a medical system doesn't even know if they're being managed. And
Right.
I'm sure that's true.
I'd rather not know, because if I don't know,
That's
I
right.
don't actually know to act. But we're getting to the point where you can't do that anymore, right? So that's kind of the context.
Well, and just to talk to that, one of the things, it goes back to one of my original statements, that education amongst this industry is critical. I don't think it can be understated that we have to have these conversations and we have to educate the industry. We spent the first year of the consortium traveling around the country holding small market, what do we call it, market little meetings in major markets like Houston and Dallas and Atlanta and San Francisco and New York. And we held those. We brought the healthcare systems in those markets to the table and talked to them. And I was shocked at the number of people who still had that attitude, who said, well, we didn't know our medical devices could get infected. We don't look at them for being infected. We try to just not notice what's going on over there because it seems like a really big problem that we don't want to look at, like you're saying. And I think that brings up the big problem is this, with this, is we don't want to cause market hysteria with the problem, but it's a problem. And what causes the hysteria is that we don't know the effects of the problem, right? We don't know when a device becomes infected with anything, it doesn't matter. If it becomes infected with a virus or it just becomes, some weird kind of network traffic just starts to knock some services offline within the device. We don't know what happens to patient care with that device. So this is a huge question mark that we all have to err because of the industry we're in on the side of safety. We have to stop using the device when we notice that happens. And yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that the VA did to deal with the issue, and they do monitor their network, a lot. In fact, they're clearly the tip of the spear there for the leaders out there in terms of best practices.
Mm-hmm.
And as she said, everyone we spoke to feels the pain. We've never had a healthcare system said we don't have pain here, right? We don't have concerns. That's what we mean by pain. And none of them said, hey, we have this totally nailed down and we know exactly what methodology we should use. and we feel like there's not much else to learn. So no one says that, and that's why every healthcare system has agreed to participate in the consortium. It's just a matter of how fast we can bring them on board and still keep everybody engaged.
Right.
And we're approaching 40, and that's systems, so there's probably well over 1,000. But how many, quick question, I just wanted to just touch base. So one of the things they spearheaded, and we'll talk about this more in the next session as we get into technology, but how many segregated networks did you do to try to protect those?
So what we did was we implemented a fire stop, and we put all of our devices very quickly over a very short period of time behind, put them in VLANs and put very restrictive ACLs on them. Very sort of, I call it a poor man's way to just immediately segment our medical devices into isolation on our network. But now we're at the point where we're trying to manage 3,000 VLANs across an enterprise across the U.S., which is a huge task. And the cost and the overhead of trying to manage that is large. Yeah.
And then the other thing is now the big issue is interoperability. So
yeah.
So
now we got to open those up and make it work with the EMR, right?
And then Intel, what do you think about segregating, building 3,000 networks and pulling everything off the general network? Setting them up.
Yeah. well, obviously we probably wouldn't recommend that for precisely the reasons you mentioned, right? It's very difficult to manage, and oddly enough, in some cases, if it's not done properly, right, you can actually open holes you don't know about, right? Because you've got such a complex system you're kind of managed. Now, clearly the EA has the staff and the knowledge to do that, but I think you have a lot of smaller hospitals that may or may not have the competency or be able to commit the staff to make sure or understand where those holes could be and the experience level. So yeah.
So, Steve, GE has been known to recommend or build private networks, right, within hospitals? Like, have GE, so the GE equipment would go on a
Yeah, we delve into a lot of different types of products. We're getting more and more into infrastructure, I would say. A traditional business is the medical devices. And to answer the question that was asked a few minutes ago, I would say, based on my knowledge, I would be very surprised if many of our customers were using any kind of network monitoring or traffic monitoring in order to infer any type of attack. The initial response to security is somewhat oversimplified in my mind, which I think is one of the benefits of having more in-depth discussion on it. It's simplified in the sense of doing what you would do for your laptop or computer that you might have at home. They want support for antivirus or anti-malware. They want patch management. And because of privacy laws, many want encryption, and they don't necessarily understand all the implications of encryption. They just want to encrypt everything because that's a safe harbor from data breach. So sometimes the initial look is oversimplified, and it's sort of metric-driven, but it's not really getting at potential root causes. The other thing to keep in mind is that security is always risk-based. So until we want to be proactive and promote methods that will prevent bad things from happening, let's say. But until you start to see data indicating that there's significant risk associated with these items that's recognizable to people as risk associated with security, the perceived risk level is going to be fairly low. And I think, like Lynette was saying earlier, we don't want to exaggerate what the risk is, but we do want to be proactive in addressing it as well.
So to add to that, one of the things we had to do is put in place what general IT devices and medical devices. So we put in processes that Lynette worked on where if it was a medical device, that we would identify as a medical device. And then we were able to do the extra triage and to document. And then one of the things we got from that was data about what's affecting that. And then we took the data, and now we've used it to put in, like, don't put in the, have your thumb drive scanned, even for the manufacturers. A lot of times they bring in, make sure that, configure was a big one. So all the different things that we saw, we were able to then make a change to it. So it wasn't just the monitoring, but it was also the...
And just to add one more point to that, is you bring up a great point, and one of the hearts of the consortium and all the people who were the founding members of the consortium is that there's lots of community-based hospitals that don't have the resources to put toward that effort. And this consortium absolutely believes in making sure that we turn around as quickly as possible best practices and knowledge to that community of hospital care systems, because this impacts everyone. Healthcare is not an individual thing that only impacts one person. We want those community-based hospitals to have access to the body of knowledge that we can collect and we can turn around and put back out.
And so along the same lines, what the consortium is sort of keenly got on is the approach has to be, what is a reasonable framework for medical device security? It's not just about the malware, it's about the network itself. So, for example, there's lots of concern around the wireless network, which is, again, it's a new emerging infrastructure. There's concerns about whether or not it's truly a medical grade network. And that's a term that doesn't have a clear definition yet. But the concern is that, hey, it could be more robust on how to make, how to get it there. The issue of manufacturer-based networks within hospitals comes up a lot. Because on the one hand, we hear some healthcare systems saying, we don't know what's going on inside those networks. We have no visibility into those networks. Right? On the other hand, some manufacturers say, some healthcare organizations say, we have no problem, and it's great. We don't have to worry about those networks. Right? But if you're the CIO, and having been one in some organizations, it gets me a little bit nervous. Something happens, I can't go and say it wasn't my job or anything. So these kinds of issues are emerging, and to deal with it in a one-off scenario, you don't get the picture. So having a population of hospitals that are dealing with these issues helps us to move the needle in interesting ways. Any other comments?
Just curious, where it is a manufacturer network in hospital, is there contractual adoption of the risk by the manufacturer?
We haven't put that, we haven't.
No. Yeah, and that's that's something of discussion amongst the customers and providers. But We are in the realm of the medical device. We also do remote servicing. So we have connectivity to the hospital network with if they have a service contract with us. Other device manufacturers would be in the same situation. We do provide healthcare IT equipment, as other manufacturers do. They may not actually be medical devices, but they're part of the IT infrastructure. When you talk about liability, that's when it starts to get kind of sticky. You can't, now what we won't do, and I think other manufacturers would be in the same.
Who gets to take the liability?
Well, again, that depends on what happens, but we will be, our lawyers will be very reluctant, understandably, to sign an agreement that transfers liability to us automatically, because you never, once a device is installed in a customer's facility, we kind of lose control of it. And I'll give you just a crude example. We have products that are medical devices, so I'm not talking about an IT device. I'm talking about something that is strictly defined as a medical device. It has no medical-related use cases that would require it to be connected to the Internet, yet because it is basically a workstation, customers like to use it to get out on the Internet. So because they are using it outside of our defined medical functionality, it can become infected with viruses, and it can be placed at risk beyond the user environment that really we have considered in its design. That's another reason why we need to have more collaborative solutions, because we have to, just like you do with safety, you have to anticipate, in a context of safety, you have to anticipate misuse that you could reasonably expect to happen in the user environment. The same thing really has to hold true with security. Now, we don't actually manage, but we don't,
Customers at the hospitals have said that. Hospitals.
Right.
So, Steve was speaking from the GE perspective and touching on this really important issue of responsibility. But in fact, Randy and I were at one of these lunch and learns in New York City together, and a very prominent healthcare system said, "We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. We basically have all of our devices on networks that are run by manufacturers." But you must have tens of thousands of devices. How many manufacturers? They said, well, we have 5 manufacturers. I still can't believe this. But they said we have 5 manufacturers, and all the devices are on one of those 5 networks, and they're managed. So we have no risk. That was the beginning and end of that discussion. Now, it's clear that there's a lot of editorial around that discussion, and it's disturbing, right?
yeah, and one thing I was going to add as well on that topic, some of you may be familiar with a relatively new standard called IEC 80001. That's a standard that defines a process for healthcare providers or healthcare, the healthcare environment to apply risk management to their network. The reason for the standard basically is because you can't manage risk purely at the device level. When the device manufacturers design and deliver a device, there's no way that you can anticipate the network and all the risks associated with the network on which the device is going to be used. So the user environment is a system of systems, lots of complexity, so there's risks that can be managed within the individual device, but there's also a much broader array of risks that are within the network environment. So whoever's managing the network, you need to address risk at that level, and you need to rely upon the capabilities of the devices within the network, both medical devices, IT infrastructure, and what have you. But you can't look at it just at the device level, and you can't look at it just at the network level.
And so that issue of responsibility, are you getting ready to say something?
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, you may be familiar with 80,001 and the standard that's emerged. People familiar with 80,001? So, 80,001, someone want to just do a quick one sentence about 80,001?
I thought I did.
Yeah, because Steve did.
If it wasn't adequate, then somebody else can.
Probably distracted for a moment.
No.
Right. But the responsibility agreement there is one of the things that the consortium is looking at doing, is working on that issue of responsibility and trying to figure out how to manage it, because clearly it's just there's discomfort around it.
Well, and the discomfort, and that's what I was going to address. And we all do work very collaboratively together, but there is tension that exists between the manufacturer and the healthcare delivery organization. And it goes to the point that Steve was making. The manufacturer has a responsibility to a point. So essentially when we buy a medical device, we have a shared risk responsibility when that device comes into our network. The manufacturer maintains a portion of that responsibility, and the HDO takes on a portion of that responsibility. From a purely IT security standpoint, from my background, when a manufacturer tells me, well, you have to take on portion of the responsibility for protecting that device, I have to look back at them and go, well, if you're not going to let me patch it, you've tied my hands behind my back, and I can do nothing with it at this point. Because at the same time that manufacturers take that stand, and it is a far better conversation now than it was 2 years ago. Steve and I fought 2 years ago. No, I'm just kidding. And no, it was fun. Yeah, his predecessor. No, but
We know who won.
you know, taking it down to its base level, none of us go out and buy a home PC, bring it home, and put it on our internet connection at our house without installing antivirus on it. But that is specifically what the manufacturers are asking the healthcare delivery organizations to do with, and it doesn't have to be antivirus. It can be malware. It can be anything. You don't install your home PC on any of that, and our home PC doesn't do nearly the critical support, although some people's bank account may be critical support for them. But, you know, it's obviously not as critical as a component as a medical device. But I have manufacturers coming in telling me, hey, if you want me to service this machine and keep it maintenance, you've got to open up port 80 and port 443 to the internet so I can service the machine. And I'm like, oh, and at the same time, you're not going to patch it. So that's the tension that really exists. And I think that's what you're kind of alluding to. And it still exists. There's not a clean solution for that. We need them to service and maintenance it because that's part of their FDA regulatory requirement, and we have to use it in patient care. I don't necessarily want it open to the internet, though, while it's not being patched.
So we don't want to get
Right.
too technical because the next question is getting technical. But let's suffice to say that the issue of responsibility is a critical issue, and the consortium is evolving to really be a nice venue, a safe harbor to discuss the issue of responsibility. And again, all stakeholders have real valid perspectives. It's about we're a manufacturer. Really, I can take my thing and you know, having been a doctor, deliver care and maybe not so much care to the medical device that I used to deliver care. You know, I know that things are not always, you know, factory-ready, factory-made condition a week after they're put in the healthcare system.
Yeah, and Dale, can I throw two pieces into this?
Sure.
So, you know, first of all, we've seen as a reality that, you know, you have a very great differential between the sizes of different healthcare systems. And so there are some that are very sophisticated about dealing with our devices within their system. There's an awful lot of them that go back to us and say, you know what, our biomeds are busy. We want your salespeople, we want your service people to come in and do all the maintenance on the machine rather than our people, because it's just not a good use of our time. So I think one of the things that we're going to need to be able to look at is, you know, how do the best advice that we give people handle the fact that you have very different levels of sophistication and capability and resources available to the different systems and what they'll be able to do and what they won't be able to do. So that's going to be very important for us. I think the other thing to take into account is what Lynette brought up yesterday, and that's that, you know, the VA, I don't want to speak for you, you can tell me if I'm saying it wrong, but I think other people will start saying, hey, listen, if you don't do something, we're going to have to fix it even if you don't do it. There's a mitigating cost. And we are going to, when we take a look at your product versus somebody else's product, we're going to calculate what that mitigating cost is, and we're going to add that to the total cost of ownership of your product. And from my point of view, I think that's great because it puts a level ground on when we go back to our design people and say, listen, you need to do this because the buyers are going to look at this and consider it as a cost whether or not you've done it. So either we have it as a feature or we have it as a detriment. And I think we're going to see that as we do these things also.
So I'm going to try to wrap it up. We're going to have a little bit of a break. So the consortium is a safe harbor. It's an environment to bring the stakeholders together around really complex issues that are very interesting. These are issues that didn't exist a short time ago. And the complexity of the issues are accelerating. 3,000 to 5,000 new apps. You know, bring your own devices. You know, increased interoperability. There's lots of things that are driving increased risk. And as technology evolves, the innovation in technology outside of a medical device, but the innovation in technology is so fast, and then you drop it into patient care environments. It's different than bringing it at home. And so it's a much bigger challenge to understand how to manage that risk in the healthcare environment and to take advantage of the in the world of pharmacologic intervention, it's different. You know, you're touching biology directly there. The innovation cycles are much longer. It takes 20 years to get a drug to market. You know, if you look at the average numbers, $1 billion in 20 years. You know, an app can be created, you know, in a day in someone's bedroom today, and you know, be accessible in you know, a tablet. And you know, somewhere in between are the other medical devices. So the challenges of dealing with security and ultimately safety and privacy in a rapid cycle innovation environment is one of the things that the consortium, and maybe the thing that the consortium is really trying to manage. And by bringing people together, we really are again, accelerating our capability to identify the issues and to share experience and share expertise, because no single entity, remarkable, no single healthcare system, no single manufacturer, no single, you know, component manufacturer, no regulator, no one's got the expertise today to cut across all the issues that have emerged. And one reason to do it is to be secure and safe. The other reason to do it is to really be able to enjoy the innovation that, you know, probably touches all of us, you know, day-to-day in our healthcare system. So I don't know if anyone has any last question or issue from the audience.
Is this going to result in standard? What's the expected output of the consortium?
Great. So MDISS is not a standard development organization. In fact, there are lots of those out there. It takes minimum 3 years, probably 5 or 6 years to get a standard out there. So we feel that that's too long. And so what, thanks for asking the question, but you know, so one of the expressions we use is that we're doing public health through procurement. And we think by working together, and again, working together not just to get the HEOs, the hospitals to say, these are the requirements or the controls we want in place, so you better give those to us tomorrow. You know, that's not going to do anyone any good because they likely can't be delivered tomorrow. What we want to do is collectively, manufacturers and component folks and infrastructure people and the healthcare system to say, okay, if these are our issues, what are the controls we need and how can we look at an adoption path, right? And so that we get this collectively as safe as possible, as quickly as possible. And we think working as an industry and an ecosystem, we can come to some agreements and get things put into place more rapidly than we'll have it through a standards-based, you know, event or regulation or guidelines. Now, having said that, so our hope is to achieve through collaborative procurement, if you will, policy practices and requirements, drive things more quickly because of shared interest. We do believe that our products, which will be a list of requirements, you know, will map that to current standards. We're looking at all the standards that we think are relevant from the industrial control system world plus the medical world. We're mapping those together. We're extracting from them typical risk management, you know, issues or data points, specific controls. We're mapping those out, making them available to folks so that we can put those into RFPs and things like that. Then we expect the SDOs, the Standard Development Organizations, to look at what we've produced, and we expect it to show up in the standards in the coming 3 to 6 years. But by that time, we hopefully will have seen movement in the market.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, much of the technology to do this is in place, right? I mean, you have everything from antivirus to firewalls to encryption in place, and you know, many of the technologies are there already, right? That can help implement or help support this. So it's not like, you know, the consortium has to say, oh, go off and invent this, right? Okay. No, many of these things are in place, and it's recognizing which ones really, that from a trade-off perspective, are best used to mitigate or to support various and what the OEMs can do reasonably, and what they so a lot of that's advantage I think the organization has as well.
So very quickly, so what do we do? 4 pillars, four pillars. One is education. So as we move through, we build a curriculum. What's important to know about security and medical devices? Then we build content against the curriculum, and we push it out to the ecosystem. That doesn't exist right now. No one's written a manual on this yet, let alone, you know, the curriculum. The second is experience. So education, second is experience. So from that, we're collecting the documents, the best practices from healthcare systems. So So we're going to take a break. We actually take a 10-minute break